You're listening to the weekly Parsha podcast, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramat Beit Shemesh, Israel, 5776, 2016. This week's Parsha is Parsha's Yisro. In this week's Parsha, we have the Aseret HaDibros, the amazing revelation. God revealed himself openly and clearly to at least 1.5 million people at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai. I'd like to share with you some midrashim, a few beautiful midrashim that speak about how Hashem did this. The very beginning of the relationship of Hashem with the Jewish people is right here. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God, God says to the Jewish people. And it's done in a very specific and unique way. When it comes, as we read the verses, when it comes to Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the first of the 10 commandments, and the second one as well, Hashem openly reveals himself and directly speaks to the Jewish people. Unlike the rest of the Torah. The rest of the 10 commandments also are not spoken directly by God to the Jewish people, but rather are spoken by God to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses, who relays the commandments to the Jewish people. Indeed, the Jewish people hear Moshe Rabbeinu receiving these words from God. They hear God speaking to Moshe. But the revelation of God openly to the entire nation, as Chazal, as the sages tell us, is too much for the Jewish people, and therefore the vast majority of the commandments are given through Moshe Rabbeinu, through Moses. But the first of the 10 commandments and the second are both given directly by God to the Jewish people. It's very interesting. As we read the midrashim that speak about this, so we come across something unusual in the description of it. There are a few things that I want to share about it, but I'd like to focus specifically and mainly on the following midrash. It says like this: Vayidaber Elokim es kol hadvarim ha'ela lemor. The verse says that God spoke all of these matters as follows. The verse goes on, this is in chapter 20, verse 1. The verse goes on to speak about the 10 commandments that God spoke to the Jewish people. Betachsis shel malachim, says the midrash, an amazing thing. The normal way of a king is that he doesn't speak directly to the people. The king issues an edict, issues a command. He gives it to his officers. The officers write it up. The officers send out the command on scrolls, perhaps, to the entire kingdom, and they're able to receive those commands. But ordinarily, the king himself doesn't get up and gather the entire nation, his entire kingdom, to his palace and say, "Here, I want to tell you something," and he, announces with a loud voice, and everyone hears him. That's not usually what's done. That's not how a king behaves. But Hashem, God, when it came to revealing himself, revealing the Torah, revealing specifically the first 2 of the 10 commandments, God himself revealed it. In a way which is unusual for kings, God behaved with the Jewish people. Shenemar, and the Medrash brings a pasuk, Iti milavonon kala, that you are with me from Lebanon, my dear bride. So what's this a reference to? As we know, Shir Ashir in the Song of Songs, which is a verse from chapter 4, verse 8. The Song of Songs is a song of love between God and the Jewish people. And this particular verse speaks about the fact that God is revealing himself to his Kala, to the Jewish people who are his bride, and they are with him. Milavonon explains the Eitz Yosef. What is this word Lebanon? What is the idea of Lebanon? Levonon. So the idea of Lebanon is, and he brings it down from Shir Hashirim Rabbah, from the Medrash and Shir Hashirim, that talks about the fact that the Jewish people were the lowest of the low. They were in the farthest reaches of slavery, farthest reaches of degradation. This idea of their degradation is encapsulated in the word Levonon, because the word Levonon at its root can also mean Levena, which means bricks, because they were forming these bricks and building these buildings for the Egyptians at the time. And Hashem took them from that dirt, from within the dirt, and he brought them under the chuppah, brought them into that relationship with him. The Medrash points out, as the Eitz Yosef brings, this as opposed to Achashverosh, in the story of Purim. So Achashverosh would bring all of these women, and they would have to go through 6 months of a process where they became beautiful, and then another 6 months. It was a whole process before they came, and they became the Kala. They came into a relationship with the king, Achashverosh, Lahavdil. Elef Alfei Avdolos, they couldn't enter into that relationship coming from their uncouth background and their physical being not being involved in all of the different things that make her more beautiful and make her more presentable to the king. the Jewish people were not presentable. When they came to Har Sinai, they came out of the filth. They were still dirty. They were still disgusting, as it were. But Hashem took them, Itim Lavon and Kala, took you right out from building those bricks, from building those buildings with those bricks, from that filth. I took you out. And I spoke to you directly. Iti, you were with me, my dear bride. This amazing love of Hashem they had for the Jewish people. Lama kach, says the Medrash, what's the reason for this? B'schus she'amru naaseh v'nishma. It was in the merit of the fact that they said, we will do and we will listen. An amazing thing. Hashem wanted really not to reveal himself directly to the Jewish people, as the Yosef explains in this Medrash. He didn't want to, but because they said naaseh v'nishma, there was a change of plan, as it were. Things were different because they said naaseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. Because they were so ready to do whatever it was that Hashem wanted to command them. Whatever it was that it meant to have a relationship with Hashem, because they were so willing and so ready, and they said, we will do and we will listen. They said, we will do. They hadn't even heard about it yet. We're ready to hear. We're ready to do whatever you say, Hashem, and we'll find out later what that is. That type of statement from the Jewish people meant that now Hashem is willing, because they made that statement, now Hashem was willing to reveal himself absolutely and openly to the Jewish people directly, and not through a Moshe Rabbeinu, not through any kind of intermediary. And this despite the fact that they were meluchlachim, that they were dirty. They had just come out, as we said, of Mitzrayim, of Egypt, where they had been slaves. Now the Medrash continues and says, Vayoshev Moshe as direi ha'amel Hashem. Moshe brought back the words of the nation to God. The fact that they had said naaseh v'nishma, Moshe, as it were, of course Hashem knows what they said, but it was part of this process, this kind of courting between God and the Jewish people. The Jewish people said, yes, we're ready to do whatever you say, God. At that moment, it was a funny thing. God, as it were, was placed in a little bit of a predicament. Moshe Rabbeinu was standing next to him. As it were, Moshe is waiting to be the messenger of God. But Hashem has already decided now, because they said naaseh v'nishma, Hashem has decided that he wants to give it directly. He doesn't need Moshe to be standing there. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem says, Ma esem ibnei Moshe, what should I do about this? What should I do about Moshe? I'm Rabbi Levi. Rabbi Levi says, Mashal HaMelech. This is analogous to a king. Shabikesh lasis afim tata chutz midayta shel parkos. He wanted to create some kind of positive edict within his kingdom. He wanted to do something really good for the people of his kingdom, but he wasn't interested in taking advice from his miyatzim, from his advisors. Amar loy asay davar plani. So what he wanted to do is he wanted the advisor to get, to remove himself from the location, but he didn't want the advisor to be insulted that he wasn't asking his advice. So he says to his advisor, please do a particular thing. I would like you to take care of this thing for me. Amar Leik Farnasis. The advisor says, oh, that thing has already been done. I've already taken care of that. Shuv Amar Leik Lech Kra Leplani Sinkali Tokos. He says to him, I want you to call to a particular officer, another advisor of mine. I want you to go there to him where he is and bring him back, come back, and then I'd like to be involved with you. But until that moment, until you bring this other advisor, I don't want to talk to you. In the meantime, while his first advisor went to get the other advisor, so the king went and did what he wanted. He announced this positive edict in his kingdom in the meantime, as this advisor had left. Hashem wanted to give the Aser Sadibros, the 10 Commandments. Moses was standing next to him. Hashem says to himself, as it were, I'm going to open up the heavens. I'm going to say, I am Hashem your God. They're going to say, who said it? HaKadosh Baruch Hu or Moshe? Is it God who said, I am God? Or is it Moses that said that? I don't want it to be that way, Hashem says. Let Moses go down, and then I'll say, I'm Hashem your God. So this is what Hashem said to him. Hashem says, I want you to make sure that they keep the edict that we said. We said that there's an obligation to Jewish people. We need to be very careful when it comes to the revelation at Mount Sinai. If they get too close to the mountain, they'll be destroyed. Spiritually, physically, they'll be gone. So we need to we need to make a fence around the entire mountain. I want you to make sure that they do what needs to be done, sanctify themselves, clean off their clothes, etc. Amar lo kvar kdashtim. So Moshe says, this is something that you already told me to do previously. I've already taken care of that. This is something that Hashem had already commanded him. Now Hashem is commanding him again. So, similar to that, to the analogy. So Hashem says to him, I want you to go down, and then I want you to come back with Aaron. In the meantime, while Moshe went down, as it were, to get Aaron, so Hashem revealed himself to the Jewish people. The verse says, Moses goes down to the nation, immediately God speaks and begins to say the Ten Commandments, I am Hashem, your God, etc. So there are a few questions as we read this medrash that come up. The first question is that, what is the power? Why? Because they said naaseh v'nishma. What is so significant about naaseh v'nishma that now, because they said that, so therefore Hashem is going to speak to them directly? That's question number one. Question number two is that we see that when it comes to the other commandments, the other 611 commandments, so Hashem doesn't seem to be concerned that they might think that Moshe Rabbeinu is saying it and not him. When it comes to Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God, Hashem doesn't want them to make any mistakes and think that it was said by Moshe. Hashem wants to be very clear that it was only said by him. What's the significance of this, or what's the depth of it? Also very interesting is that most of the commandments in the Torah are openly commandments. Lo yelecha Elohim al-cherim al-ponai, Hashem says, you shall not have any other gods in front of me. Lo signov, lo sinov. All of the commandments are clear, direct commandments. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, when God says the first of the 10 commandments, it doesn't say, you shall believe in me. That's not what God says. He says, I am Hashem, your God, who took you out of Egypt. It's just a statement. It's not a command. And yet it is counted as the first of the 10 commandments. It's one of the 613 commandments. But Hashem doesn't command. Hashem doesn't say, you shall believe in me. I mean, obviously, we're talking about a revelation. You can't, if I'm talking to you, I can't say you must believe that Ari Goldwag exists. I can't say that. Obviously, if I'm talking to you, it doesn't really make sense for me to make such a command. But Hashem is saying that I am, even though you see me now, as it were, even though you are experiencing me now, there will be a time when it will not be as openly revealed. So you have to still believe in me even then. So if that's the case, if that's the essence of what Hashem is saying, why does he say it in this way? Why does he say, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God, without saying openly, directly, you shall believe in me, you shall always remember that I am Hashem your God? Why doesn't Hashem say it that way? So I think that there's an amazing depth that this medrash is coming to teach us about the idea of the command or the fact that Hashem exists, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the fact that there's a revelation that Hashem exists and we are commanded to believe in Hashem, to remember the fact that we know at our core, at our essence, that Hashem exists. It's not really a command, because as far as a person is from God, the greatest atheist in the world, the one who shries, he's screaming, he's crying, there is no God, or he's saying, if there is a God, how could it be, blah, 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 etc. Even that person at the root of the reason why he doesn't believe in God is because he does believe in God. He just can't accept the fact that God would allow a certain thing to happen, etc., etc. But every human being, every Jew at their core believes in Hashem. Every person knows, we are programmed to know by Hashem that there is Hashem, that God exists. And that's something that no matter how far a person is, as meluchlach, as dirty spiritually as the person may be, as degraded as they may be from being a slave and seemingly not have any bechir, not have any choice, as far as they are, still Hashem is there. Still the person knows at their essence that they're exalted, that they are a kingdom of priests. Mamlechas Kayan v'Goy Kodesh, a kingdom. They are amazingly exalted people, and that they have that connection to Hashem, who is the King of all kings. And the King himself comes down and talks to them, unlike a human king which has to have all of these separations between himself and the peasants in his kingdom. For Hashem, he's a different type of king. He's a king who each and every one of his kingdom, all of the peasants, as it were, of his kingdom are truly princes. They are all his children. And as a result of that, he speaks to each one of them directly. And the statement of Anochi Hashem Elokecha couldn't be done through a Moshe Rabbeinu, it couldn't be done through any intermediary. Because the Jew needs to know that no matter what, no matter how far they are, they don't need anybody else in order to get back in touch with their spirituality, to get back in touch with God. They don't need a tzaddik, they don't need a righteous one. Of course, tzaddik will help them. Of course, being connected to people who are spiritual is vastly important. But that's not a prerequisite for a person to be able to come back into a relationship with Hashem. However far they are, Hashem wants them to know from the onset the foundation is Anochi Hashem Elokecha. It's not even a command. It's a statement. You know me. I took you out of Egypt. You know me. I'm the one. I'm the one that you know deep in the deepest depths of your heart. No matter how far you are, no matter how degraded you are, spiritually, no matter how far you are, you know me. I am your king. I'm the one who loves you. No matter what, no matter how far you are, no matter how dirty you are. And you don't need, and that's something that you don't need to hear from somebody else. You have to hear it only from Hashem. But now we come to the second part, which is how does one get in there? How do you access that? Because you don't always feel that. You don't always know that. I am indeed meluchlach. I am. I've been serving these Egyptians for so long, and they are the epitome of distance from Hashem. Here I am so far away from Hashem. So, all I am is levanim. All I am is building these bricks, building these buildings out of bricks, making these bricks out of dirt, out of mortar. So how do I get back in? How do I touch Anochi? How do I touch the essence of who I am, of my relationship with Hashem? And the answer is, amazingly, naaseh v'nishma. The statement of the Jewish people is, naaseh v'nishma, I will do and I will hear. Mikoch ma, where do they get the power to make such a statement? Naaseh v'nishma, whatever you say I will do. I haven't even heard it yet. I'm going to do whatever you say? How did they say that? And Hashem himself, as Chazal tell us, our sages say, Hashem himself, God is himself, as it were, is mitpaleh. He can't, it's unbelievable to Hashem that the Jewish people have said this statement. But where does it come from? Where does the statement come from? I will do whatever you say, Hashem. The answer is it comes from a recognition of the fact that the Jewish people had the hakara, they had this recognition, an open, clear recognition of the fact that everything that Hashem is doing for them is because He loves them. All of the challenges, all the difficulties, the farthest depths that they've come to are all somehow, they may not understand why or how, but somehow they see, especially in light of the amazing miracles that they're experiencing, they see that Hashem loves them so deeply. And it couldn't be that Hashem, who loves them so deeply, would tell them to do anything that wouldn't be the best for them. Naaseh v'nishma means, I recognize that you love me, Hashem. I recognize that you care so much about me, you're willing to do miracles for me. Openly reveal yourself to the entire world, which is against your rules, against the rules that you created the world with, but you're willing to do that against the rules, to openly reveal yourself for me because you love me. And if you love me, naaseh v'nishma, I'll do whatever you say. So when a person says, Hashem, I will do whatever you say, and even though it seems to be the opposite so many times, so much, it seems to be the opposite of that. I'm willing to do whatever you say, even though it seems like it doesn't seem that you love me. It seems like you're so far from me. It seems I'm so far from you. But if I can say, naaseh v'nishma, no matter where I am, Hashem, I acknowledge that whatever you're doing for me is the best. I know you love me. That's where Hashem says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am Hashem, your God. You have tapped into the truth, to the true depth of the essence of who you are. And no one else is going to tell you that. I will tell you that myself, Hashem says. So I want to bless you. I'm asking you to please bless me back. Hashem should help us to be able to have that hakara, to have that recognition of what we know, to know what we know, to touch on what we know. And it starts with a hakara, a recognition of the fact that we also know that Hashem loves us. Hashem should help us to recognize His unending love for us. Hashem should help us to see it in our lives, to see it in our children, to see it in all of the amazing things that are there. Sometimes there are so many difficulties that are happening in our lives that we lose sight of the fact that there's so much good alongside the difficulties. Hashem should help us to see the good alongside sometimes the difficulties. Hashem should help us recognize and be able to say in our lives, naaseh v'nishma, Hashem, whatever you say I'm willing to do. I don't know yet what it is, but I'm willing to follow your lead, to follow your directions. And by saying that, Hashem should help us to be able to see to the core of who we are and hear the voice directly of Hashem, of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, that I am Hashem, your God. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.